ha, ha. Welcome back, everybody. What is the best pastel paper? Today we're going to find out. What do I use? Or what do I recommend? I get those questions at least once a month, if not almost daily. I'm pastelist Avon Waters, and my channel is dedicated to helping you not make some of the same mistakes I do. You get to make your own mistakes, but at least I'll help you sort through some of the chaff to figure out what pastel paper is best for you. If you've ever stood in an art store or looked at a mail order catalog and seen all the different choices for pastel paper and wondered why are there so many choices? We have the traditional pastel paper, we also have the non-traditional pastel papers, and we have homemade options. As we look at these three categories, what I want to do first is create a baseline. This is a piece of newsprint. Most of us have dealt with newsprint. We know how smooth the texture is. We've done some work with it, whether we were kids or adults. And I'm going to make a baseline here, and I'm going to use a light value. You can see how light value, it doesn't take much pressure. It fills in the tooth of this paper. Dust is falling off. You may not be able to see it in the video, but we can mark across it and remove some with a finger. So it will give you an idea of the tooth as we proceed to traditional papers, non-traditional papers, and then on to homemade surfaces. I'm not pushing as hard. You can see some of the skips and jumps here. The skips and jumps are here also, but this will give you an idea that when I use these other papers, you'll be able to make a comparison to something that you're familiar with. This is Mi-Teintes. This is a Canson paper. It has two different sides, and when you look at pastel papers, there often will be two different sides. The same with watercolor paper. One side's rougher than the other, and one side's smoother. This is the more smooth side. It still has texture, much more than the newsprint. And this is the more, a lot of people would call it laid paper. You see almost a canvas pattern on this side, but not near as thick as canvas. I'll put this up here and you can compare how these two compare to this. This is the more laid side that has the lines that simulate a very fine canvas. And this is the smoother side. And I've tried to put the same amount of pressure on. In the darks values, you have the same sort of skips and jumps. This is the smooth side. And you can see some of the skips and jumps on the smooth side are less with about the same amount of pressure as on this side here. Now you remember when I put this down in here, the amount of pressure and the number of strokes wasn't very many before we got to this level and filled up the tooth of the newsprint. But watch this. I put one layer on there. I'm going to put about the same amount of pressure and put another layer on there. I'm going to put some more on there. There's 3, there's 4, and now the paper is about filled up on this smoother side. So there's one layer, 2 layers, 3, 4 actually, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You can get 6 to 8, because I went up, you can get 6 to 8 layers on there before it starts flaking off. Much better. And if you buy this, you'll see that there's very little difference in the tooth. Now let's do the lights. The smoother side of this paper, there's 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers, 5 layers, about 5 layers. We got about 5 layers and now it's starting to flake off. So now we'll go to the rougher side of the Mi-Teintes. There's 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers. Now it's starting to build up and I'm pressing much harder than my first layer. So 4 or 5 layers pressing hard, the first layer being softer. So if you weren't pressing hard, you could get a lot more layers on here than when we were over here. I think, yeah, I'm still getting some layers on even though it's flaking off. So you get a couple more layers. This is probably closer to 5 or 6 layers. Pressing hardness is probably 3 or 4 layers on the smoother side. So you get just a couple more with a little more texture. I'll narrate as I do some blending here, so you'll see how this Mi-Teintes blends. Mi-Teintes is just one brand. There are many different brands of pastel paper. This is all Pastelist had back in the 60s and 70s, is just this thin, lightweight paper. That's one of the cons, is although it's affordable, that's a pro. A con is you get limited layers, but in the beginning, 3 or 4 layers might be all a beginner needs just to learn their pastels. And I can drag it out into here. But there's all sorts of paper. This comes in pads, they come in sheets, they're affordable. They're great for beginners. They come in different tints. There's white, there's this tint, and many, many others. They come in pads that have multiple tints, so you get to play with backgrounds. They're great for beginners because oftentimes, until you learn how to put more than 5 or 6 layers on a pastel, you're not going to need the tooth that other papers offer you. Before I go on to non-traditional papers used with pastel, this is the back side of a piece of sanded paper. It's not the sandpaper that you buy in your local hardware, but it's graded the same. A 400 grit sandpaper that you would use on a furniture project at home is the same as the 400 grit on a piece of pastel sanded paper. Other surfaces like velour and these sanded papers, I'm not going to go into that today and demo those. I want to keep this video short and succinct for the very rank beginner to figure out what paper and options they might want to use until they get used to pastel. In my workshops, live and online workshops, I go into these other surfaces, and velours are really, really nice, and so is sanded once you get past the beginner stage. But we'll save that for another day. I am now going to go to the simple, lowly sketchbook paper. It has more tooth than our newsprint. So it would be a good comparison. So if you want to start with some pastels and not buy some pastel paper, this is even less expensive. Here's our light hue, and I'm going to put it on with about the same pressure I did with the newsprint. That's about 1 coat light. Here's our darker hue. We'll still get some skips and jumps. Look at that. We're getting a lot more skips and jumps on just the lowly sketching paper. Much better than newsprint. So our newsprint, you all know how slick it is. Just for regular sketching paper, this isn't anything special. It's any brand that you want will have about the same result. That's 1 layer. I'm going to now, instead of press hard like I did on the pastel paper, I'm going to see how many coats I can get on this. And I'm betting we can get just as many that I did hard and pressed hard and put a lot of pressure on that pastel paper. I bet that we can get just as many on here. So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. We're starting to fill up almost all the holes there. There's 4. It's not taking very much of the pastel and it's starting to ball up. So 3 or 4 light applications just on a sketch paper. Let's see how it does with a dark hue. 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's starting to ball up. There are skips and jumps in here, but because this is a light hue and this is a dark hue, our skips and jumps are showing more here. So you would probably at this point, in order to get some more on here, have to do some blending. And as you blend, the pastel falls off and you can get a fresh coat over the top. But you don't see it much, so you'd have to maybe use a different color or a different hue or a different value to add another coat back into there. It looks like light pressure will give us about 4 coats. Now, I got a little space up here, so let's see what if I press hard. This is about how I press down here. You can see our skips and jumps are more, so that shows us we have more tooth, more texture on this paper as our control sample on the newsprint. So there's one. There's two, pressing hard. There's three. About 3 coats is the limit with just a drawing paper. So you do get a little bit more with the pastel paper. There's no magic formula that makes pastel paper different other than the surface texture they put on it when they manufacture it. They're both quality papers. They're both usable. The only difference is the tooth that's in there. Now let's go to non-traditional surfaces, non-traditional paper surfaces. This is just a portion of a gray mat board that I cut out the mat around it, and this is the cutout. This could be illustration board, this could be tag board, this could be anything. And what I've done is I've taken the white side, the back side of this, and I have just taken a fine brush and painted 1 coat of clear gesso on here. And it gives us a tooth. This is a good alternative to sanded paper. If you price sanded paper, you're going to see that sanded paper is a lot more expensive than those other 2 options, the traditional and the non-traditional. So let me put this up here and we'll do our test. So up to this point, we have explored the traditional pastel papers, and we've seen that they will give you a little bit more, maybe 25, 30% more layering than traditional drawing paper. But the advantage to drawing paper is it's even cheaper than pastel textured papers. The disadvantage is it can fill up quicker. Another advantage is it's very versatile. You have lots of different options. You could use mixed media, you could use watercolor paper. So there's a number of traditional papers that are used in any other medium. Like I said, there's no special formula. And another disadvantage to just using a paper that's not dedicated to pastel is you'll get some varied results. Each drawing paper will have slightly different reactions to pastel than another maker. All right, this is a homemade surface, as I explained. So now let's try this. I've already forgotten how many coats we had on the traditional paper and the pastel, but let's see what we get. Well, you got to get the glove out of the way. This is 1 coat. This is 2 coats. This is 3 coats. I've got a lot of space left on here. There's 4 coats. It's still not balling up like the other papers. I can see it's starting to fill up more. There's 5. That one's pretty heavy. There's 6. About 6 coats, I'm starting to see it ball up and fall off on the light hue. But boy, look at that. It fills in all those skips and jumps. Here's our first coat with our darker hue. Second coat. Third coat. Fourth coat. Fifth coat. We still have skips and jumps. It's just, I can still put a little more pastel on there. Like if this was a different color, you'd see that. But boy, about the 6th coat, and it starts to ball up. These marks that I'm making are balling up and falling off. You can, and then we blend it in and we can fill in all those skips and jumps. And by doing that, I can get another coat or 2 across there. So you can layer 5 or 6 different layers, blend it, and add some more layers. And every time you blend on a piece of paper coated with gesso and grit, open up some of that texture that's in there, and you can create more layers. So much more versatile than either traditional pastel papers. Much more layering is possible. And the versatility is that you can just brush stuff off, add more pastel on top of it. So we've got excellent layering capabilities. This is a piece of, I put the dark hue in there, and by using this piece of pipe insulation, I'm actually blending this dark hue and this hue together. And you see it's not as bright. We've dulled it down. And you see it's got excellent mark making and layering options to it. And you can put it on anything. You could put it on panel, you could put it on mixed media paper, anything that you can wet and it not wrinkle up like that. A very thin drawing paper, putting gesso on it probably wouldn't work as well. You get a lot of buckles. But as you can see, let me blend this other. You can see this versatility that this gives you. And it gets you introduced to sanded. So once you get past the stage of learning your pastels, how they work on your beginning sketch papers, and if you can afford pastel paper right out of the gate, you could use pastel paper and skip the sketching paper. And then once you get used to these things, then you can make your own with some clear gesso, and you'll make your own surfaces and be able to start to learn how, once you move to the more expensive sanded, then you'll be able to use this as a learning tool, because there's some things about the homemade paper that you're not able to see on this video, is that every time there's a brush stroke, there's an extra little layer of ridges. And when I put a light coat on there, I can see that brush stroke. I have to start blending a little bit more to get rid of the brush strokes. There's a lot of versatility here. It's an excellent intermediate step before you purchase sanded or velour papers, which again, I'll go through all those in much longer video on my online workshops or in-person workshops. So be sure to hit those and take a look on my website, and we'll get you set up. So there you go. That should get you started. Should give you some good ideas if you've already used plain paper and maybe you want to now move on to traditional pastel papers. I call those the traditional papers because that's what they had for years and years and decades and decades. The non-traditional papers are just anything that's not pastel. A homemade surface, the sanded papers have come along just in the last couple decades, and the velour surfaces. And again, on my workshops, I'll talk about those. It should give you an idea of how you can start with simple papers that are available that you may already have. Graduate yourself up to a pastel paper like a Mi-Teintes or a paper with a little texture in it. Then step up from there to creating some homemade surfaces using clear gesso until you can afford those sanded papers. That's a great progression, and we'll talk more about papers and we'll demo all those papers in my workshops. So until next time, everybody, happy painting and so long, and we'll see you with another great episode and tutorial next week. Bye-bye, everybody.